The car in front is leading us to a place where until last week few Syrians would dare to venture. The gate is guarded by militiamen of Syria's new Salvation government. It looks like any factory, with a shipping container for exporting the goods.
This is amazing. We've been brought here by a man who doesn't want to show his face. He says that before, this was a factory making potato crisps.
But after Bashar al-Assad's brother Maher seized the premises, it was used for more sinister purposes.
My God.
Captagon.
Captagon here. This one is Captagon as well. I mean, what I'm looking at now, this is the mainstay of the Assad economy, these drugs. And here, these are electronic components. My God, this is heavy. This is really heavy. This will have been worth, well, I don't know, tens of thousands. This is what kept the Assad regime going, this stuff.
The illegal drug trade was worth $10 billion a year to the regime, more than Syria's official GDP. 2 interlocked half-moons on each pill show it's Captagon, an amphetamine manufactured for a few cents, retailed for $25 a pill.
This is a drug that's used all over the Gulf. It's like a clubbing drug in Saudi Arabia. And nearly all of it was made here and in Hezbollah facilities in Lebanon.
While we were looking around, the original crisp factory owner appeared.
بال 2018 تم اغتصاب المصنع واتهموني بالإرهاب وهجروني. رجعنا نحن قبل سقوط بشار الأسد ب10 أيام. يوم السقوط جينا لهون منعونا في قوات فرقة الرابعة تبع ماهر الأسد. اعتقلنا 2 وسلمناهم للهيئة الشرعية.
We found a business card for Amer Taisir Khiti, an associate of Maher al-Assad, sanctioned for his role in the Captagon trade, and labels for a consignment of apricots destined for Dubai. But that's not real fruit, it's plastic, used to contain the pills for export.
They would put the drug in fake oranges. What they would do is they would have a plastic orange, and the orange would not be full of a normal orange segments. It would be full of those pills instead, and that was how they exported them all over the region.
We walked further in. The floor was sticky with residue. The plastic containers had melted, apparently because Assad's people had tried to burn the place down before fleeing.
I'm told that what I'm seeing here are the precursors for Captagon. Now, those chemicals could have been imported from anywhere. Some of them may have come from China, they may not. But that's what they were putting together here to turn into the drug.
In another room, we found more precursors. Some of these chemicals are also used in cleaning products. They're not illegal until combined with other ingredients to make Captagon.
مخزن للمواد الأولية اللي هي تحضير الحبوب السموم اكتشفناه وموجود بحوزتنا وسلمناه للهيئة السياسية العليا وإن شاء الله حتيجي لجنة تستلمه منا ونقوم بعملية تلفه وإحراقه.
Here's the equipment used to cook it all up. Fighters use Captagon to stay awake and aggressive. So will Syria's new rulers destroy all this? Some of their own militiamen will have used the drug. The debris of a corrupt narco state, a country run by a mafia family. But if Syria gets no aid and can't restart its legitimate economy, the temptation will be to keep the drug trade going. One of a plethora of challenges facing the revolutionaries, who say they want Syria to leave its sordid past behind.
Well, let's talk more about this with Caroline Rose, who's director of the New Lines Institute think tank. She runs projects on the Captagon trade and post-withdrawal security landscapes and regularly briefs governments, parliaments and intelligence agencies on the Captagon trade, and she joins me now from New York. Good evening. First of all, how big is this in Syria? How many factories are there like the one Lindsey managed to get into today?
First off, thank you so much for having me on. I have to say, after researching the Captagon for many years and really assessing the amount of Captagon factories like this, it's really amazing to finally see footage from inside of these facilities. When it comes to assessing just how many there are, we saw that there are numerous industrial scale factories and warehouses like these, concentrated around Latakia, Aleppo, Douma, Damascus, as well as quite a few small-scale factories that are quite mobile and can cross the border between Syria and Lebanon. It's very difficult to put a number on just how many there are in the south, but at least in the north, we expect that there to be over at least 10 large-scale industrial factories. It's possible, though, as this was just reported, that many of the regime's members, as well as some of their allies, tried to disassemble some of these factories as the regime was being ousted in the last few days of the offensive.
I mean, we don't precisely know what will happen to them yet, and whether they will all just be destroyed or whether, you know, the lack of revenue in this country will force people to get them back into gear. But if we assume for a moment that they all stop, you know, does that stop the trade?
No, it does not. In fact, I think what will happen is that the Captagon trade will only complicate further. Ultimately, over the last 2 years, really, we've started to see the spillover of Captagon into neighboring transit markets, for example, like Lebanon, into Iraq, even into Turkey as well. Kuwait, there have been some signs of production and trafficking, as well as some countries that are further away. For example, in Germany and the Netherlands, there have been Captagon manufacturing centers. In Austria, there was a trafficking ring that was busted. And there's been some activity, Captagon-related activity with trafficking in Libya, as well as in Egypt. So I think that ultimately what this is going to do, it's going to push some of these criminal actors to get creative, to identify some existing networks, as well as identify new routes, new locations for production. And we'll see this large-scale spillover of the Captagon trade outside of Syria, as there is a likely crackdown on industrial-scale production. This really means that we'll see a short-term halt or at least a pause in supply, but ultimately criminal actors will be creative. They'll try and fill that gap, especially since demand levels continue.
And as a drug, I mean, is it addictive? I mean, a lot of the fighters were thought to have used it in the field. I mean, if it stops in Syria, I mean, is it going to cause other social problems?
Certainly. I think Captagon's a very interesting drug because unlike others where you have maybe, you know, a narrowed level or a narrowed pool of demographics and user profiles, Captagon is quite large because it's got mass appeal. If you want to stave hunger, or if you're income insecure or food insecure, Captagon is very lucrative because it allows you to subsist on maybe 1 to 2 meals per day. Also, if you need to stay up late, if you're working multiple shifts, Captagon is useful for that because it allows you to stay up at night. So, you know, taxi drivers, lorry drivers, workers who are working their second or third shifts, Captagon is very lucrative to use. But also on the flip side, wealthy classes are also attracted to Captagon for recreational purposes. For example, university students flock to Captagon. Nightclub goers also flock to Captagon. And because in the region there's such a large taboo with illicit drug use, it is a very attractive drug for that region because there is a illicit history of Captagon from the 1960s to the 1980s.
Caroline Rose, thank you very much indeed. We must leave it there. Thanks for joining us. Well, the UN says humanitarian needs are growing in Syria, with thousands of people displaced across the country following the collapse of the regime. Joining me here in Damascus, Christina Bethke from the World Health Organization. the health service here, the hospitals, must also be on their knees. How great is the need?
Thank you so much. Indeed, even before this crisis, we had more than 15 million people that were in need of health services, and we know at least 1.6 million have been displaced since. Just about 50% of hospitals are functional at this time when we have a great need for emergency and trauma care. And we also know that populations are on the move right now, and we have a tremendous concern about contamination with explosive ordnance.
So how can all of that be filled in the short term?
So the UN and its partners are on the ground. WHO is focused on ensuring the continuity of healthcare in this country. And we do that through working with local partners. Some of our priorities are not only to look at the hospital services, but also primary health care. And additionally, we see a tremendous growing need for psychological support. We're seeing families, communities, children alike exhibiting signs of trauma and distress as a result of their displacement and the conflict.
But this is also going to boil down to resource here in Syria. Now, I know you're dealing with this new transitional government, and they are clearly seeking funding from, perhaps friendly countries outside. They've got talks with Qatar and Turkey today. I mean, how urgent is it to fill that funding gap?
So even before this escalation began, more than 140 healthcare facilities, mainly in northwest Syria, were facing imminent closure as a result of lack of resources. And for the humanitarian community, we have an annual appeal for the needs, and it was only 25% funded before this all started. So it couldn't be more critical at this time.
And there could be a big influx of people. There are millions of Syrians who are thinking about coming back.
Rightly so. We do expect that, and we worry about ensuring that a health system already under strain. I mean, we had the earthquake, we've had cholera, we've had more than 500,000 people come from Lebanon during that country's crisis very recently. And now with the tremendous displacement and influx, we're quite worried about sustaining those health services and helping them be able to deliver life-saving care to people in need.
I mean, they are trying to keep their emergency services going, clearly, and organisations like the White Helmets and Violet are trying to sort of step in, but they could quickly find it's quite difficult and complicated to keep going. I mean, how far away are we potentially from sort of a breakdown in that sort of emergency care?
So the health system in most places will always endure irrespective of the level of conflict. It's a question of will people be able to access life-saving care on time at the level that they need. And indeed, there's critical things that need to come. It's not only resources. First and foremost, we need to protect healthcare workers and health facilities. We also have an urgent need to reopen the border crossings to allow those emergency supplies to flow into the country.
And now, there is still war going on in this country as well. So how does that complicate the picture in the north?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Certainly displacement, because the more people on the move, the more strain. And again, the safety and protection of healthcare workers and health facilities is so critical. Unfortunately, we've seen across this conflict that hasn't always been protected. And so that complicates things further. And then again, the ability of the system to sustain increased strain. If we have an outbreak, if we have more displacement, it's hard to sustain those services.
Christina Bethley, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.